Kia ora, my name is Karina and I work in the home ownership space here in Auckland, New Zealand. For the past 4.5 years, I've helped families get into their first homes through affordable rental into home ownership and shared ownership programs. And I want to help as many Kiwis get into their first home as possible. This series is called From Renter to Homeowner. Last episode, we talked about the 5 must-ask questions before you even consider buying a house. Given you're here, I'm guessing you've decided to buy a house, which is super exciting. So now we have to figure out how much do you actually have to buy the house. So this episode is all about deposits. What is a deposit? It's basically all the money that you have to contribute towards buying the house. So what can a deposit be made up of? You've got your Kiwi saver. As long as you've been contributing for at least 3 years, you can withdraw all but $1,000. It can be savings, a koha, or a gift. Maybe you've got a rich auntie that wants to help you out. If you do get a koha or a gifted amount, you will need to produce what's called a gifting certificate. All that is to confirm to the bank that it is a gift and it's not actually a loan in disguise. So that'll just be like, I, rich auntie, give my niece or nephew this amount of money and there's no expectation for them to pay it back. That's basically all it is. So you've got KiwiSaver, say koha or a gift. You may have a superannuation through work that allows you to withdraw some money to go towards your first home. And basically you're going to take all those things, add them together, and that's what's called a deposit. The deposit is just how much money you have to go towards buying the house. And then the shortfall, what you don't have to buy the house, is what you go to the bank for and ask for a loan for. So here's the most asked question. Do you need a 20% deposit? And you actually may not necessarily need to, which is awesome. 20% is deemed the gold standard. Basically, the banks see it as a lower risk. So if you have 20% or more deposit, it's going to be an easier approval process. You access or unlock the special rates. You start your journey at a lower risk. And I'll go into values increasing and decreasing and how that affects you as well in a different episode. So 20% deposit or more is deemed the gold standard. And yes, it's something to aim for, but depending on what the market's doing, it may be that it's actually a better idea to just go in on a 10% deposit. The market may be going up, and so it might be, oh, let's get in now, enjoy the capital gains as it goes up, and don't miss out. It's going to be different for everybody. The market's going to be different at the time for everybody, and I'm waffling again. So you've got your 20% deposit, gold standard. Now we've got your low deposit options. Yes, that is a thing, which is exciting. Okay, so you can have 10% all the way up to 19.99% or whatever, and they're considered a low deposit option. They are options at the banks, but they are market dependent. It depends on the bank's risk at the time. So although they are an option, the availability at the time that you apply, it'll vary. So the banks have a capacity to allow for low deposit lending. And so one bank may have used all of these up and another bank may not have. So if a bank says no, maybe you can try another bank, and then the market effects as well. The banks might be getting strict and we're not happy with doing the lower deposit lending. Basically with higher risk, it means it's going to be more expensive to borrow that money. What do I mean by that? The banks will apply what's called a low equity margin. All that is an additional interest on top of whatever you've chosen as your interest rate. When you have a 10% deposit, it means that you have 90% borrowing. You're just trying to make up 100% of the home. So if you've got 20% deposit, you have 80% borrowing. And so the borrowing factor is important because it helps the bank figure out how much your low equity margin, the additional interest, is going to be on top. So say you've got a 10% deposit, you're going to get your LEM that applies to a 90% borrowing. And I'll pop that up here. And so here you'll see you take your 5% plus the 90% LEM equals your total interest rate. The low equity margin doesn't need to stay on for the full term of the loan. It can be reassessed. So the low equity margin, that gets calculated, it's attached to that mortgage. So say you fix for 2 years, at the end of the 2-year period, the value of the house will be relooked at, whether it's through the bank's desktop valuation or a registered valuation gets ordered, and it will show, so say it shows you now have 20% equity in the home, or your borrowings, your mortgage is down to 80% of the value. That's great. They can now drop that LEM off and now you're refixed to whatever the current rates are at the time, but you don't have that low equity margin added on top. If you don't fix and you're on the floating rate, that means that you can have it reassessed at any time. And so it may be a market where you can see that the house prices are increasing quite quickly. And so you're like, we might fix for 6 months, or we might go on a floating rate, just so that you can have it reassessed and that LEM potentially dropped off or reduced. Just a quick note. So when you are going to buy a house, the money that you contribute or the money that you have in the home is called a deposit. When you buy the house, that deposit is now referred to as equity, how much ownership you have in that house. Back on track. Now, here's a section that might surprise people. There are opportunities to buy a house with just 5% deposit up to 9.99. So I'm going through the different stages. We've got 20% deposit and more, and then you've got 10% up to below 20%, and then you've got 5% up to below 10%. So it is possible to buy a house with only 5% deposit. So we've got the Kāinga Order First Home Loan, which offers a 5% deposit to get into your first home, which is awesome. The other product available is shared ownership, which is delivered through, there are a couple organisations that do it. Because it is a specific product, only some banks provide that product. So it's limited to certain banks. And those products also have their own eligibility criteria. So you've got the bank's lending criteria, which you still have to meet, but then there's the additional to meet for these specific products. So for Kāinga Order First Home Loan, there's an income cap, same with the shared ownership program. But it's usually for those that need just a little hand up into the market. I'll put shared ownership to the side because I will do a series on that. That's my niche, and I'd love to share everything about it. But the Kāinga Order First Home Loan, because it is a lower deposit, there is some risk to mitigate. And so for them, instead of a low equity margin, they're going to apply what's called a LMI, or lender's mortgage insurance. And so all that is 1.2% of whatever loan that you borrow. And most families just chuck it on top of their loan because they don't have a few thousand just hanging about. So that's how the Kāinga Order First Home Loan works. I've created a resource and I've actually compared the different deposit types and how it affects your numbers. So what the mortgage repayments would look like, what your total lending would look like. So if you want to check that out, it's a free resource. You just have to sign up. So we've talked about how much money you have to go towards the house. Next episode, we'll talk about how much money you don't have to go towards the house. So we're going to be looking at banks and what tests you have to pass in order to access the money you don't have. I'll see you at the next one. Ka kite anō.